ごめん、俺、もう少しこのままでもいいかな。顔上げられないや。これでお別れってわけじゃないのにね。
本当に息を吸うように嘘をつけるんですね。
また大学でも一緒なのにね。
でもいつも優しい嘘でした。
When life knocks you down, you're rarely offered any courtesy. It is simply expected that you get up and try again. And though it's difficult, it's generally human nature to continue moving forward. A fundamental truth of life is that one must not be too fixated on either the past or the future. Rather, it's important to keep both in sight while focusing on the present. With the goal of learning from one's mistakes in mind, we continue to forge onwards. But sometimes, when faced with extreme tragedy, it's easy to find ourselves asking why? What's the point? There are times when we are faced with such misfortune that one might feel broken past repair. And when you're so devastatingly shattered, it feels impossible to pick the pieces back up. When you're pushed to this point, you're left with a choice. The easier option is to resign yourself to your situation and accept your circumstances as insurmountable. The second and more difficult option is gritting your teeth and pushing yourself to your feet and bearing the weight of adversity. Viewed side by side, you can see the appeal of the former, and yet these two choices are incomparably similar. The former is to give in and become submissive to the unfairness of life. The latter is to simply accept this unfairness as inevitable, but not let it define your worldview. And this is the trial faced by Kaizaki Arata, the main character of ReLIFE. As a 20-something anime watcher that's been an avid fan for many years, I find it increasingly difficult to relate to many of the new slice of life series that tend to center on high schoolers and particularly on youthful optimism. That's not to say I don't love them regardless, because I definitely do, but age has left me ever so slightly detached from the unbending positivity that can characterize anime protagonists. And so I guess I just got lucky when I stumbled across ReLIFE. This series came at a particularly formative time in my own life, one filled with exhaustion, stress, anxiety, and fear. I found myself identifying heavily with this slightly older and more disillusioned protagonist. As a whole, ReLIFE doesn't shy away from the bleakness of the real world that can sometimes be absent from anime aired at younger demographics. But I was completely unprepared for the themes I would draw from it. At a time that might have been the lowest in my life, ReLIFE presented me with the beautiful redemption of a man with whom I shared a lot of feelings. It offered me that shift in perspective I needed when I was down on my luck. Kaizaki Arata is immediately introduced as a failure, bearing the title of NEET at age 27. Though he had a job set up immediately following his completion of grad school, he quit only a few months after starting. Thanks to financial support from his parents, Kaizaki makes ends meet through a part-time convenience store job. While likable, his apparent laziness and lack of independence are the initial traits he's introduced with. Additionally, he's exceedingly concerned with appearances, lying to his collegiate friends about maintaining his corporate job. His circumstances lead him to be invited to participate in an experiment called ReLIFE. Said experiment would have Kaizaki take a pill, miraculously changing his appearance to that of a teenager, and spending a year as a high school student, in hopes of restoring his youthful hopefulness and positivity. In my own life, something that was always instilled in me by my mother and father was the importance of appearances. The idea that impressions are everything is something that was drilled deeply into my consciousness. This notion resulted in my younger self conflating my outward presentation with how I viewed myself. I began to see myself as a caricature, an exaggeration of the qualities I made an effort to present to the world, with little care to my real self. I related heavily to Kaizaki's fixation with appearances, in that I, too, began to feel as if my own happiness didn't matter, as long as others saw me as the successful person that I was striving to be. As such, my perception of the world took on a futile tone, as if nothing really mattered as long as I could maintain appearances. Of course, this was only a facade. At the heart of Kaizaki's character is overwhelming guilt and sadness, a result of the suicide of his mentor and former senior at work. Much of his guilt and shame stem from the belief that he is heavily responsible for her death. After completing grad school, Kaizaki entered employment at a company where he was placed under the tutelage of a woman named Saiki. Despite having almost no actual screen time, Saiki is one of the most important characters to the protagonist and subsequently the series as a whole. Saiki would go to teach Kaizaki many things, with her moral code being something that stuck heavily after her death. More importantly, however, is that Saiki became someone Kaizaki would deeply respect and care for. Her death would signify Kaizaki's lowest point, his rock bottom, and would heavily traumatize him, leading to him quitting his job and the events of the series beginning. The sadness and guilt he displays are only a fraction of how significant this moment truly is to him, however. To Kaizaki, Saiki represented justice in a cutthroat and unforgiving world, and her death would signify a total collapse of his worldview. Saiki was, to Kaizaki, a pillar he could rely on. She was his silver lining. With Saiki's death, Kaizaki would lose a core element of his character, for she represented all the faith and confidence he had in the world. Saiki's death resulted in Kaizaki's complete loss of faith in humanity and himself, as well as social withdrawal. Her existence was the very thing that grounded him to sanity, in a world that terrified him. Life is hard, and at times it can feel mundane and pointless. One setback, major or minor in severity, can shatter your confidence and make you lose perspective. Kaizaki Arata is a man who shed blood, sweat, and tears, agonizing over every decision, only to be met with more heartbreak than he could have prepared for. He's reduced to a fraction of his former self. Once an optimistic, passionate, and empathetic hard worker, now a distant, apathetic man who couldn't care less. The pain he endured completely warped his worldview. When you lose someone you love or deeply care for, it's easy to feel like you can't love again, or that you simply don't deserve to. Despite not sharing the same impetus for these emotions, the theme of indifference really struck a chord with me. In my own life, I find myself frequently struggling to care for, relate to, and understand even those I'm closest to. I find myself wondering if it's even possible for me to love someone, given who I am as a person, or if I deserve to have someone who deeply cares for me. I've even grown to question my own humanity at times. Am I a real person? Or closer to a doll that's learned to replicate human behavior but not completely comprehend it? When life knocks you down, you're simply expected to get back up. When something's shattered, there's never a convenient or easy way to pick up the pieces. ReLIFE is a series that primarily understands this factor of life, and I find this to be particularly realistic. I find myself falling into this mindset more often than not. But ReLIFE isn't just about life kicking you to the curb. The reason I love this story so much is because ReLIFE is a series that believes in you. It's so beautiful because you get to experience Kaizaki's ReLIFE with him, as if you're also participating. For me, a 20-something-year-old struggling to find purpose, ReLIFE was an extremely cathartic and validating experience. Kaizaki is a man who had great circumstances, but faltered despite that. Watching him regain his former self and remember what he loves about life was truly gratifying. In life, it's easy to lose perspective. When you're moving forward, you tend not to realize how far you've gone. Similarly, when you lose something extremely important, it's easy to lose sight of other things that matter. But ReLIFE inspires you to remember what you love, what you're grateful for. When you think all is lost, you need only look back and see just how far you traveled, and remember that the highs of life are just as temporary as the lows. This story is something I didn't know that I needed. It's quite fantastic. When I watched it, I was certainly at one of the lowest points of my life. I identified with Kaizaki with his cynical perspective of the world, and I was ready for another series with an emotionally distant and scarred protagonist. But what I didn't know I needed was bigger than that. ReLIFE, at its core, is a series that says, in the face of overwhelming odds against you, it's all about perspective. When you let something shatter your worldview, it cracks the image you have of everything you see. Looking at the world through a pained lens paints everything in a depressing light. Instead, ReLIFE says that you can do it. Don't forget about all the hard work you've already put in. It's only in vain if you let it be. Both the highs and lows of life are temporary, so embrace the highs while you have them, and don't let the lows get you down too much. This theme means so much to me even now. Anime like ReLIFE are extremely important to me because they make me feel as if I can be saved. It's validating and cathartic. Watching someone's redemption from self-hate to its antithesis is gratifying. It instills the belief in the watcher that not all is lost. Through its undeniably human characters, ReLIFE tackles the multifaceted nature of trauma. That some things cut you so deeply that they can warp your view of the world and of yourself. Some of those wounds might be so painful that they never fully heal, and that's okay. What's more is that you can take this pain and let it change you without making you a bad person either. ReLIFE weaves these themes intricately yet effortlessly into its dialogue and plot, delicately illustrating the melancholy redemption of a broken man who lost arguably the most important thing in his life. In the final episode of the OVA, Hishido Chizuru thinks to herself, in regards to Kaizaki, "You really do lie as easily as you breathe. But it was always a lie of kindness." This statement is a microcosm of Kaizaki's character, in that despite his attempts to distance himself and protect his wounded heart, he consistently acts with the well-being of others in mind. I think that Kaizaki is one of the most compelling characters ever written, because his arc isn't characterized by grand showings of emotion that frequently characterize anime. His development is expressed simply, in a nuanced way that is unequivocally human. The audience gets to watch him slowly open up to others in a rewarding journey to recovering his former self. These themes resonate so clearly and beautifully, exploring the highs and lows of life and everything in between. To that end, ReLIFE is as much a story about loving and losing something as it is about Kaizaki and the ReLIFE experiment. It's truly a heart-wrenching experience, born from the beautiful relationships created between characters that are painfully realistic. ReLIFE examines the true gravity of the power of emotion, and the reality those emotions can come to manifest if they're strong enough. This theme is elegantly carried through Kaizaki Arata's carefully crafted character, which was executed flawlessly. His fall and subsequent rise are proof of the resilience of human nature and the power of human contact. The narrative is largely constructed around Kaizaki's formation of relationships, which connects the series' emphasis on the importance of bonds with others. Kaizaki and his peers demonstrate the true brevity of these relationships, providing a both thematically rich and emotionally resonant experience. And aside from this thematically rich and resonant experience, the major thematic takeaways are beautiful. In the face of overwhelming odds against you, what matters most is perspective.